So I'm Anna Robinson in the Ecosystems Analysis team at JNCC, where I've been involved in project management of various surveillance schemes for a number of years. I'm going to give a bit of an overview of the monitoring we do. So we think that it's important that policy is evidence-based, and monitoring can form a really important evidence source. The UK has a long tradition of volunteers getting involved in monitoring biodiversity. For example, repeat recording of wildflowers started in 1947. And JNCC has been involved in supporting monitoring since its inception about 30 years ago. So JNCC supports monitoring of birds of different types, bats, butterflies, plants, which tells us about habitats, a whole range of different taxonomic groups that we support through recording through the Biological Record Centre. And we also support the pollinator monitoring scheme, which is led by CEH. So we use a partnership approach for monitoring. We work very closely with NGOs, research organisations, other government, environmental bodies, and a vast network of volunteer, amateur citizen scientists who put an awful lot of time and expertise into it. So it's important to note amateur doesn't mean poor quality data. These volunteers are often really experienced in their specific field of interest. And the schemes also provide training to help ensure that volunteers are well equipped to collect accurate data. And they follow specific protocols. And we also have a really big sample size. That means there's greater statistical power coming out of the schemes. So this slide shows you what's good value for money using this approaches. The different columns on the chart show the different schemes that JNCC support. And the blue section at the bottom shows the amount of funding that JNCC invests in the schemes. The green shows our partner investment, and the large orange bar at the top shows the value of the volunteer time that goes into the schemes. So citizen science is not free. We do need to have ongoing investment to provide training and feedback to support and ensure continued engagement of the volunteers. But it's definitely really good value for money, and we wouldn't have nearly as good biodiversity data as we do if we didn't have all this volunteer input. So I'm now going to go through some of the key monitoring schemes that we support. So firstly, the UK Butterfly Monitoring Scheme. This uses a transect recording approach where volunteers walk set routes and record all the butterflies in a 5-metre box around them under appropriate weather conditions. So when the schemes were set up, volunteers were allowed to choose their transect route. However, that does mean that there's quite a lot of sites in nature reserves which have easy access and where you're likely to see lots of butterflies. That's still really useful information, but we did decide to develop the scheme a bit. So in 2009, we introduced a new component to the UK Butterfly Monitoring Scheme called the Wider Countryside Butterfly Survey. And this uses a stratified random 1 kilometre square sample network to give better representation of what's going on across the wider countryside. And you can see in this map that we've now got pretty good coverage of both components of the scheme across the UK. So the Breeding Bird Survey is the scheme that we support which has the best sample coverage. There are almost 3,000 volunteers taking part, recording over 4,000 sites throughout the UK. You can see on this map, again, there's very good coverage across the UK. I would note there's often slightly sparser sample coverage in the upland areas because people don't live there, it's harder to access. But the Breeding Bird Survey has been taking some action to try and address this. For example, introducing the Upland Rovers scheme, which means that volunteers are allowed to sign up to sample the square in an upland area whilst on holiday as a once-off rather than having to go back regularly. So that's really useful in improving our sample coverage. So the Wetland Bird Survey is our longest running scheme. It started as the National Wildflower Counts in 1947. It recently celebrated its platinum anniversary, and it's really useful having such long-term data sets. So the Goose and Swan monitoring programme has targeted species surveys. The censuses are coordinated on selected dates, and there's also some wider international coordination. For example, there's the International Swan Census that takes part throughout Western Eurasia, and the Goose and Swan monitoring programme coordinates the UK component of that. The Avian demographic scheme is the scheme that has the most volunteer time going into it. It includes the nest record scheme and the national ringing scheme. And volunteers are appropriately trained and permitted and follow a code of conduct to ensure bird welfare. It's really useful to get bird demographic data, as it can give us early warnings on issues and can help us to better understand mechanisms of change. This graph just shows how the average laying dates of the long-tailed tit and swallow have got earlier over past decades, thought to be due to climate warming. The National Bat Monitoring Programme relies on bat detectors to monitor bats, as they call, making very high frequency sounds which are not audible to humans generally speaking, but using the bat detector means that we can identify them, and different bat species make different frequency calls. So there are currently 4 key surveys in the National Bat Monitoring Programme: the Field Survey, Waterway Survey, Roost Counts and Hibernation Survey. And we're also currently looking into developing a new multispectral static bat detector approach. So this will involve leaving a detector out overnight, and it will record across a range of frequencies, so you can record multiple bats that are in the vicinity. So the National Plant Monitoring Scheme is our newest scheme. We launched it just 5 years ago, following several years of development. We wanted to make sure it was scientifically robust, so it's got carefully designed protocols and a sample network which is random stratified, weighted towards semi-natural habitats. And we also wanted to ensure it was volunteer friendly. So there are 3 different participation levels, different levels of difficulty. So there's the wildflower level, where volunteers can take part and just record a very simple list of plants. There's an intermediate indicator level, and then if you're a really experienced keen botanist, you can record everything on your plot at the inventory level of recording. So these schemes I've been talking about are all structured schemes where volunteers follow a set protocol and go back to the same sites. But we also support a lot of unstructured recording. So quite often people want to go out on walks and just spot something they're interested in and want to submit a record for it. And that can provide really useful evidence too. So JNCC supports with UKCEH the Biological Record Centre, and this supports over 80 schemes and societies to support their volunteers to provide ad hoc records, and this provides records for over 15,000 species. We also support the Rare Breeding Birds panel that collates and manages records of a whole range of rare and scarce breeding birds. So all of our schemes produce an awful lot of data, which is really useful. Our key monitoring schemes have annual publication of the results, and these are published as official statistics that show that we follow a code of conduct for statistics and give extra input and credibility to the results. The trends feed into indicators at UK and country level. So this picture is just an example of the butterfly indicator that was published last year. So the results are used for a variety of purposes. So they influence policy. So both in general terms, any issues are raised up the political agenda, but also more specifically, for example, species distribution models based on Biological Record Centre data are currently being used to influence development of the England Land Management Scheme. The results can also help us to meet reporting requirements. For example, last year we had Article 17 reporting under the Habitats Directive, and the bat species accounts were very heavily reliant on data from the National Bat Monitoring Programme. The results also feed into local land management. So local nature reserve owners, for example, will be really interested to see what's on their land. And the results are also very widely used in scientific research. For example, data from the UK Butterfly Monitoring Scheme fed into 11 peer-reviewed scientific papers last year. So looking forward to our future priorities, we think it's really important to firstly maintain the evidence base. As I mentioned earlier, the citizen science approach, whilst very good value, is not free. We do need to have ongoing investment to make sure volunteers are fully trained and equipped to carry on providing this data. And we also want to improve the evidence base. So this is not just in terms of collecting the evidence, but also in terms of managing the data, processing it and using it. So we want to make better use of the data through analytical developments. One area that we've been doing that, we've been working with UKCEH and BTO to look at how to better combine structured and unstructured data to get better trends. We also want to make better use of new technologies and see how that can help benefit our monitoring. As we mentioned earlier, there's Earth observation. We're also interested in how DNA approaches can help be of use, and also thinking about how changing use of smartphones and social media might be able to provide more information. And finally, we want to better integrate our data with other data sources. An example we've already been doing this is we've used some of the National Plant Monitoring Scheme data to help create better habitats maps in the Living England mapping project. And this is based on satellite data, but we do need to have the on-the-ground data to help train the algorithms that are used in the production of the map. So we want to carry on doing pieces of work like that. So thank you everyone for listening, and thank you all our partners for working with us and helping us collect the data. And thank you in particular to all the citizen scientists who take part. I'm not sure if there are any of you in the room, but we really appreciate your efforts if there are. And I'd also mention that JNCC have recently published our new terrestrial evidence biodiversity strategy, which is on the JNCC website, where you can find out more information if you're interested. So thank you very much.